I take immense pleasure in welcoming you to the learning of this exciting area of law, environment, natural resources law, administration, and adjudication. As we get into this exciting journey of learning the law on the subject, we begin with three important aspects as the basic material to get to know as an equipment to learn this particular subject. At first, we would acquaint ourselves with the salient features of this law. The second, the basis, the sources from which this body of law draws inspiration from. And finally, the fundamental norms and principles which have steered the evolution and the working of this body of law. Let's look at the features of the discourse that we have here. This is one of a kind course. Quite unlike most of the laws that one would go through, this is not a law packaged in a single piece of legislation, which is the other way of saying there is nothing like the environmental law encapsulated in one single body of legislation. In fact, it contains a plethora of legislations numbering over 200, but there are about a dozen of them which actually form the very basis of it. Second, apart from those environmentally related, directly focused pieces of legislations on the subject, we also have environment and environmental concerns, natural resources management aspects as an integral aspect of every conceivable law on earth. And so, if you just look at the standout features of this body of law, introduction to this law would in a way introduce you to perhaps everything that is there in every law on earth. Think of it that when you get into a discourse on this subject, we are not going to discuss pure law here for the simple reason that various disciplines have made an imprint, an impact, contributed to the very content of this body of law and its working. And so, this is not pure legal discourse. Pick any piece of environment related legislation, be it pollution control, waste management, biodiversity, or anything like that. What you see is a lot of non law language being used. And so it should make it comfortable for people who are non law people also to find something of interest for them, even when reading any piece of legislation concerning environmental law. It's a multidisciplinary law, a law which transcends disciplines. It, in terms of its approach, in terms of its working, in terms of its very conception itself, it has internalized the basic principles and the rules and the grammar of quite a other large number of disciplines within its fold. It may have environmental economics, it may have human rights concerns, anthropological reflections, it may definitely have a lot to do with technology. Biotechnology is one such area. It will have at times something to do with biochemistry. It will have quite a bit of an inquiry into so many other disciplines which are either in social sciences or in natural sciences or even in physical sciences. So, in a way, it's a study on life, relationship amongst different life forms, and the human interventions in relation to different life and life forms. It is a discourse which is not just about the rights and entitlements of the people in relation to environment. It's not just a discourse on human rights. It's about human duties as well in relation to environment. And it's not just confined to human duties also. It also seeks to do equity to humans and to the environment as well. Just think about it. This is one body of law which is not confined to the learning and understanding about the interrelationship amongst the people within the present generation. This discourse has a temporal dimension to it. It transcends generations of people for the simple reason that there's a kind of realization that environment and environmental resources are not something that is owned exclusively for the benefit of the present generation, and it is something that should be left behind after satisfying the needs of the present generation for the generations to come in future. And so this is a body of law which tries to regulate human activities to seek and secure equity to humans and to the environment in an intergenerational sense. We use the expression intergenerational equity here. As we get into a reflection on this particular body of law, we would know that it is not just about humans alone, human concerns or human interests or human rights, but it touches upon every form of life in every conceivable way. Such is the remarkable feature of this body of law that it deals with the interconnectedness of lives and life forms and a conglomerate of lives and ecosystems which house them. So, as we have seen so far, the discourse is something which goes beyond human, animal, and plant life. It deals with non living things as well, everything on earth and beyond. It is not just about life alone, it covers everything about the entire life cycle, the cradle to grave, as they say, right from birth and even before birth and after death as well. It's a very interesting body of law, a unique law, a law which is one of a kind, which covers so much which no other discipline of knowledge can offer. Coming home, getting into the Indian environmental legal discourse. Indian legal discourse concerning environment is supposed to boast of the oldest and evergreen environmentally benign traditions. If you just look at our culture, the Indian composite culture, since time immemorial, you would see about that the people owed everything to nature and they worshipped the five elements of nature. All these five elements constitute environment and its resources. And by worshipping, both in their practices, customs, and traditions, and even within the religion, they sanctified every conceivable aspect of life and life forms with the divinity. There is a very interesting thing about that. When once you clothe something with the divinity, there is a kind of a taboo that it shall not be defiled, that it shall not be polluted. And so there was an inherent safeguard contemplated strategically by assigning and ascribing divinity to everything concerning nature. And that permeates into every aspect of human activity in India. In terms of law, perhaps the earliest of references to environmental law comes in the Kautilian jurisprudence. Kautilya's Arthashastra, has quite a huge reference to protection of environment, and there are passages in the Arthashastra which actually makes it a punishable offense for harming, injuring, killing certain animals and plant varieties, because plants and animals are considered to be very valuable even during those periods of time when the civilization was very early. In terms of the laws that are made by the rulers and kings, we can even trace it to some of the edicts, the stone pillars on which laws were engraved in the Ashokan edicts of certain do's and don'ts with regard to the natural resources imposed upon every citizen in that country. The other thing about the Indian law, I must add here, is that India has a blazing trail left behind by the higher judiciary in India to have, through its interpretative techniques and processes, enriched the substance and the working of every conceivable environmental law. The contribution to environmental jurisprudence by the Indian higher judiciary is unparalleled. Nowhere else in the world do you find the courts of law which are exactly required to perform the task of dispute resolution, hearing of disputes, and resolving disputes, goes beyond that as to lay down the law of the land through their interpretation of and application of different laws in any given situation. And that's what we are going to examine here in the course of our discourse here. The peculiar feature of this body of law, as you would be observing as we go along, that this is not a law which is confined to India alone. That's very interesting, because when we speak of law and legal systems, we do know that a law made in a particular country is operable only in that country, and only the governments there have jurisdiction within their territory alone. But what I'm referring to here is the body of law that has been created in India and worked in India has either drawn heavily from international inspirations, or some of the laws and some of the practices that we have here have in turn contributed to the very law and the working elsewhere in the world, including globally. And so, an introduction to this body of law, as we see here, it goes beyond the cartographic barriers of nation state system, and the catchy phrase that has been used to explain and describe about environment is that environment is a common, a global common, something which is commonly shared, enjoyed, and benefits derived from by all without any exception, irrespective of whichever country, caste, community, or religion one belongs to. So, the very feel and texture of this body of law that we discuss goes beyond the local, national barriers, and it has a transnational feel about it. Think of it, the whole discourse that we are going to have, by and large, is something very fresh, something very new, quite unlike most of the laws that you may become familiar with, whether it's administrative law, criminal law, constitutional law, or corporate law. All these have a long history behind them of thousands of years. But this is one body of law which has been developed in the last 5 decades in a very rapid way all over the world, including in India. And so it is safe and proper to mention that this is one law which is very young, dynamic, constantly evolving, effervescent, ebullient, and full of spirit and enthusiasm in exploring new avenues of regulating human activities in relation to environment to conserve, to protect, and to make it environmentally benign developmental activity. Coming to the specific aspect of the learning of this particular course, the entire course is divided into 12 modules. Each module will have 5 sections. Of this, the fifth one, in each of these modules, these are assignments and exercises for the students. The learning begins with a brief inquiry into the sources and the basis and the principles of the legal regime, and that is followed by specific aspects of law and governance like pollution control, waste management, impact assessment, etc. 2 modules are devoted entirely to focus on accessing and securing justice through formal and non-formal justice delivery system. Case studies and case laws embellish the learning of the law here. How do we understand environmental law? How do you approach it? Is it just like studying any other law? It was mentioned earlier that this is a unique law. It has a grammar of its own. It is something which is one of a kind. Interestingly, this is one body of law which is perceived and understood and followed in a wide variety of ways. Like, for example, it may be viewed as an integral aspect of administrative process, something whereby you have certain kinds of demands with regard to the resources, allocation of resources, and their utilization, monitoring, supervising, and working of that between people and avoiding frictions more as an administrative process. There is another view that it is nothing more than management of balancing things, balancing interests, and ensuring that the balance is maintained with regard to the demand and supply and the management of the entire issue. So, environmental law is also being viewed as a kind of a management discipline. And if you ask an economist, he would tell us that no, environmental law is nothing more than a tool for the application of economic principles. Like, for example, demand and resources and the availability of resources, demand and supply. So the entire thing can be viewed from the demand and supply angle. And if you ask a scientist of any description, natural scientist or a physical scientist or a scientist in ecological sciences or anything like that, he would rather say that it's all about working out the scientific principles and the scientific knowledge here. That each resource is meant to perform certain functions and using it up to a particular level and not beyond. You see a combination of both economics and science here, where you talk about carrying capacity. Every resource can take only so much of load and not beyond, and so use those resources up to that ultimate level and not beyond. And if you ask an activist, he would say it's all about realization of rights. That in terms of distribution of resources and their utilization, and when once you agree that environmental resources are common property of everyone, then there should be the scope for accessing and managing these resources for all in an equitous way. And so the entire legal regime need have to be fashioned around the rights and allocation according to the needs and demands of each one. A rights discourse. Environmental law is understood in such wide variety of ways. If you ask the developed countries, their perception about environment and environmental governance is altogether different from the perception of the developing world people. The industrialized and developed world would visualize there would be good environmental governance if there is less population and so less stress on resources, and if there is no poverty, and poverty is a worst pollutant, as they would say. So, in terms of the developing the idea about the understanding of environmental law, it depends on from where you come. If you are from the developed world, the thinking is poverty, population are closely related to pollution, and so remove these or reduce these and their impact, then there would be a better, cleaner environment. Cut to the developing world, the perceptions are entirely different. It is not just about population, it is not about how many people are there, and it is not just about the finiteness of resources and more number of people wanting to have their share in the resources and the benefits derivable from the resources. The perception in the developing world is it's about how much I consume. You may have a large population, but if that large population would do well with less resources, know how to reuse and recycle the resources to make maximum optimum utilization of the resources with minimum wants. And so the entire governance with regard to environment is dependent not on population but on consumptive patterns, patterns of consumption. That you may have less population, and they have actually put forth such arguments that there are countries in the world, like United States, for example, which hardly has about 6 to 8% of the global population, making a demand for more than 40% of the resources of the globe. In fact, and if that be the case, it's a very good argument on the part of the developing world to say that population alone, poverty alone cannot be the cause for environmental degradation and for environmental well-being. The instrumentality of law that needed to be designed should be such that it takes care of the patterns of consumption, the extent of demands that are made, and how to minimize those demands to derive the maximum benefits. Well, perceptions vary. Then, how do you understand and approach environmental law in the present context as we get into a learning of this? It's safe to assert here that perceptions and understanding of the law depends to a large extent on the nature of compulsions or the compelling circumstances under which the laws are made, the objects with which the laws are crafted, to the kind of understanding of the lawmaker, the law enforcer, and the law interpreter in applying this law in any given legal system. That determines the approach to and understanding and its application of any body of law. And environmental law can be an economic discourse, can be a management discourse, can be something which is an aspect of administration, and many more. And so it depends upon how this entire law is crafted and worked, on the basis of which you can decide that, look, this particular law and an understanding of that law has this trajectory of understanding and application. And so it's very necessary not to look at the text of the law alone, but to look at the context in which the law has been made and has been brought into application. Okay, in that event, what is the position in India? How do we understand this body of law? How do we learn environmental law? How do we learn natural resources law? Is there any formula for that? Well, the intention of this particular course is to seek to unravel, critique, and evaluate the entire legal regime in relation to it. Welcome to the exciting area of learning about environment and natural resources law in India.